Today we talk about A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. I don't know how to say it, but I enjoyed the book all the same. I feel like I'm so bad with names, but this was a really interesting book, and I think it has some really interesting predictions about society and some very fascinating things that came true. I think this book was written in the 70s or the 60s. Copyright 1962. So it was written in 1962, and it's really interesting because it seems like Burgess, or we'll just call him the author because I know I can't say it right. The author really predicts society is somewhat decaying, and it's somewhat Dostoevsky's warning against what happens when there's a lack of meaning, what happens when there's a lack of purpose, what happens when there's no such thing as a community and people don't care about each other, will people devolve into lawlessness. Essentially, the society is all but collapsing, and at night there are a bunch of young hooligans that just beat people up, do worse things to people. I'm not going to say exactly what happens, but this is a very brutal book, and if you are somewhat hesitant, somewhat not willing to face the reality of the brutality of humanity, I don't suggest reading it because this book includes all of it. This book is very raw, very brutal, and there's something in this. There's an underlying principle to this book that is so real, but it's so horrific. And I'm gonna somewhat reveal some of the plot just to talk about it. But if you haven't read it yourself, or if you don't want me to spoil some of the finer points, I wouldn't watch this video because I'm just gonna go all for it. So here's your warning. But essentially, the story follows this young boy named Alex, and the reason I didn't I tried to pick up this book several times, and several times I put it down because Alex talks in such a horrible way. He talks with slang, and it's very difficult to get through the first few sections because he's talking with his friends who are also pretty much illiterate, pretty much fools. Even one of his friends is named Dim, and he's dim for a reason because he's not very smart. And he'll come into play later in the book, and he plays this role very well. But essentially, he's a boy that every night goes out and tries to get into shenanigans, tries to beat people up, tries to take out the pain he feels about the world onto other people. But you see, he's not really that bad of a person. I mean, obviously he does awful things. Obviously, he's not a good person in the traditional sense, but he does have redeeming qualities. He loves classical music. He loves Mozart. He loves Bach. He knows all of this stuff about all of these different symphonies, and you wouldn't really think somebody that's so consumed by evil could be capable of appreciating such high art, such high ideas. But it's somewhat the juxtaposition, and you see that he's not truly irredeemable. He's just been led astray. He's just been a product of society. And it's a really interesting commentary that the author has. And it's a really interesting point that he's making. But, things go wrong. Alex goes to prison, and he's somewhat put in this experimental program to try to get out of prison quickly because he's really having a rough go about it. I don't want to talk about what happens in there. It's very brutal. You could just imagine what happens in prison when you're a young person. It's very brutal, and that's why I warned you to not read this if you're somewhat skimmish or skittish. Skittish. Couldn't think of the word. I'm just inventing words at this point. I feel like perhaps reading this and reading the slang, it put something in me to somewhat come up with my own words, like somewhat Shakespeare, but. Anyway, he's in prison and he wants to get out, so he undergoes this experimental treatment, which is essentially them drugging him and showing him all these films, and it kind of brainwashes him. So anytime that there's any sort of confrontation, anytime he wants to do something wrong, he gets lightheaded, he gets dizzy, he gets sick, and he is basically forced to become a good citizen. And there's an idea that's repeated twice throughout the book, and it's like there's no such thing as humanity without free will. And it's said first by the preacher, and then it's said by this somewhat revolutionary that takes Alex under his wing later on. But basically, this is an idea that repeats, and this is really the central point of the story, is that, we should be allowed to do wrong. We should be allowed to be evil. We should be allowed to make mistakes, because without making mistakes, then there's no point to live. If everything you did was perfect, then what's the point in actually trying? as Khalil Gibran said, every sorrow deepens your joy, and it's through experiencing pain that makes the good times so much better because we can appreciate them. And there's something so fundamental to humanity about this idea. And we could even repeat this back to the idea of original sin and how so many people see original sin as a bad thing, but to me, I think original sin is the only thing that gives life any meaning. Because if we did the right thing, if we didn't have free will, if all our actions were already predetermined, then there's no point for anything. There's no reason for anything. There's no meaning in anything. And we'll circle back to the story. And we'll circle back to how the story kind of ends, because it's interesting. The original version of Clockwork Orange in the United States was missing a last chapter. I forget exactly the reason why the last chapter wasn't involved. I think it was something to do with they wanted to truncate the story so it was easier to print. Something like that. I read the intro a very long time ago when I first tried to read this book, and then I put it down. But the original US version did not have the last chapter, and this is what Stanley Kubrick adopted into his movie, which I'm going to watch very soon because I'm really interested, because I've actually heard that Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of this story is better than the book, which I can certainly see because he's one of those directors that anything he touches is tremendous. But yeah, basically it's a different story, but this is the full version, and the story ends basically where Alex is kind of used as political propaganda, that the opposing party against the party that's in office, who's trying to clean up crime, and using Alex as a symbol of what reformation could be and all these sorts of things. They kind of use him as this somewhat monstrosity, and they kind of show that the party is so evil and they will do whatever it takes in order to create a better society, but at what cost. And he's used by these people. He's basically forced to do something very bad to himself, and it's interesting to see how he's kind of a pawn in a much larger game, and how people don't really take his experience for what they really are. They're just using him as an ends to a means. And it kind of ends with this bittersweet ending. It kind of ends with this somewhat, I don't know, there's not really a good resolution to the story, and perhaps that's why I enjoyed it so much, because I feel like there's no really end point to any story. It's kind of how we deal with things in the future, and it's somewhat like Dune to me. Like there's not a real resolution. There's not a real cathartic moment where everything goes back to normal and the hero has this great triumph and great experience. No, things are fundamentally different, and it's something that Alex is going to have to deal with for the rest of his life. And it's very fitting for this kind of story. It's very fitting for this kind of take on life, and it's very raw. It's a very good book. There's a lot of very interesting philosophical things about it. Some great predictions on how society will slowly decay because we no longer have a sense of community, because people are more and more distracted, because there's this hollow emptiness to things. There's this consumerist idea that we need to chase stuff, that we need the next fancy thing, that we need all of these tacky things in our homes. And there's a real lack of meaning, a real lack of depth, and a real lack of sincerity in our world. And Clockwork Orange is a very pessimistic take on where society is going to lead to, and in some ways I think it got it on the head. I think a lot of ways this book is somewhat reminiscent of our society, but in other ways it's not. So I'll leave that for you to kind of understand, and I'll let you read this book for yourself. I think I did a decent job of not revealing too many plot points, but kind of inspiring you to pick this up. But if you're not even going to pick up the book, you'll get what it's about, because I feel like I hopefully revealed some of the major themes. But with that said, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. I really urge you to pick up this book. Really good book. I'm going to watch the movie too as well. I'm going to watch the Stanley Kubrick version. I don't know if there's other versions. There might be, there might not be, but I'm excited to watch that movie. So with that said, peace out. I will catch you guys in the next one. If you like this video, there's more to come. If you didn't like this video, I'm glad you made it here all the same. But yeah, have a good rest of your day.